What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the opinionated hippie, and today I'm going to share my thoughts on Frank Zappa's most recent release as of what is today, July 13th, 2023. This came out about 2 weeks ago, so I've had 2 weeks to listen and re listen and form initial opinions and then change that opinions and come to new opinions. And so I'm just going to share my thoughts with you and kind of detail what's on the album and hopefully share my thoughts on what is on there. But this is what it looks like. And I do want to start off with the fact that it has this really neat, shiny gloss to it. Like it is definitely, I don't know if the sparkle and the shine and the colors, a lot of purples and those kind of things. I don't know if the colors really come across, but I feel like this is the wrong album for this sort of presentation because to me, the shininess on this screams like disco and screams late 70s. And hoping that someday we get a Shake Your Booty release, this seems like the gloss that should have been on a Shake Your Booty release. Doesn't seem like the gloss that should have been on an early 70s, primarily sort of jazz rock release. And that is what this is, primarily a jazz rock release. Frank went into the studio with a handful of musicians in early 1970 and recorded a bunch of material, and there was supposed to be an album, Funky Nothingness. And it ended up pretty much kind of being kind of Chunga's Revenge is kind of what it ended up being, because then he met Flo and Eddie and abandoned this group of musicians and moved on. Kind of weird because he drops Hot Rats, absolutely fantastic. Plays a couple shows in early 70 called the Hot Rats Band, different lineups in the two shows we do know about. There might have been more shows. One of the lineups is the band on this album. And then he kind of abandons that altogether and just goes into the Flo and Eddie vaudeville era. So, which is definitely underrated by me. Changed my opinion on that quite a bit, mainly due to the box sets that came out recently. But it's an interesting, almost like, got it out of my system. Like, all I needed was like these several days of jamming with these awesome musicians, and now I can move on. Two of them did continue on with the Flo and Eddie band, but it was quite an odd sort of shift in tone and direction and style and music and kind of everything. The band, can't complain about the band. FC, vocals, guitar. Don Sugarcane Harris of Directly From My Heart to You and Weasels Rip My Flesh fame. Vocals, violin, organ. Ian Underwood, keyboard, sax, and rhythm guitar. Max Bennett, electric and acoustic bass. And Ainsley Dunbar on drums. So the band is fantastic. And a majority of what we have here are we have a number of songs that have been previously released. A bunch of new material, some really awesome jams, but a lot of this stuff is very much in a jazz rock format. You get like a theme ahead, a whole bunch of solos, violin, guitar, organ, sax, drum, bass, and then you conclude the song. Sometimes with a completely different musical piece, a la something of like a Gregory, not a Gregory Peccary, Farther Oblivion from like the 72, 73 eras. 3 discs. The first disc is what apparently, based on the tapes and the information and things that were found in the vault, possibly the Funky Nothingness album would have looked like, would have had to have been a double album. And then the other 2 discs are like session masters, alternate takes, and bonus nothingness, as they call it. My first thought upon listening to this, something that I kind of suspected happened and had guessed one thing absolutely correctly on my preview video, was that it would fill in a lot of holes on Frank's concept of the big note. His idea like everything he played is a part of one big note. There's a lot of holes in that big note, and a lot of those holes happen in that transition from like the 60s mothers to like this period and on. And these holes are filled in on this release. We're like, oh, that's how we ended up with this song being played live by the Mothers and this version released on an album. Those gaps are filled in. And I think that's one of the most satisfying parts of this album at this point, 2 weeks into it, is just hearing those gaps filled in. And they probably, one of them for sure, I think is the highlight of the album. So briefly going through it, some of the gaps are, there's a song on here, this maybe isn't a real gap, but there's a song on here called Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild. It's a cover of a song. And it has this really neat upbeat intro that they kind of abandon and go into a different groove for the actual song. But that initial upbeat intro reminds me, it's not the same, but it reminds me of the intro to Daddy, Daddy, Daddy that, would eventually appear on 200 Motels that would be played live. And if you listen to the song, when they finish that intro and go into the song, instead of like paying attention to what's actually happening on the album, sing to yourself, she's such a dignified lady, she's so pretty and soft. It works perfectly. And it seems like Frank may have borrowed that concept, that idea of that intro, and then just, tweaked it, gave it a different bass line, and put it in front of Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. So that's pretty interesting. There's a cover of I'm a Rolling Stone. Some nice vulgar Frank lyrics in there. Frank does the singing. And Frank would eventually, my understanding is they recorded this, he took the actual rhythm tracks for this and used these actual rhythm tracks for the basic rhythm tracks for Stinkfoot. And you can definitely hear Stinkfoot in this song. It's got that same blues groove. There's that drum crazy outro that's similar in it. So there's a lot of similarities there. And this is a pretty hot smoking track. This is a pretty interesting little neat cover, as is, I think, Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild, which Sugarcane Harris sings. Really, really good, entertaining cover. We do get the Chunga's Revenge version, the basement version of Chunga's Revenge, which was released on Quadrophiliac, which is incredible. A much more succinct Titan version of that already pretty terse main riff. So instead of like that fuller, like, da na na, that kind of big sound, it's very like, da na na, da na na. I mean, it sounds like it's in a basement and they're having to play just a little bit quieter because people are playing upstairs. And it's got a really, really neat tightness about it. And it's the fifth song on the album. I think it should have been the opener. I don't think the opening 3 tracks set up the album really, really well. I'll get to that later. But I think if Chunga's Revenge had been the opener, I think it'd be a much slightly better first listen. What else do we get on here? Charlena, the record plant mix that appeared on Lost Episodes, is on here. So we had 2 tracks that had been previously released. What else as far as filling in gaps? There's a version of Twinkle Tits is on here. Twinkle Tits is a song that debuted on that early 70s show with this band. And at the end of it, there was a piece of music generally referred to on bootleg tapes as interlude. Officially got released on one of the Joes, I think Joe's Domage, as another melody, the name is completely escaping me right now. As a whole other melody is what it was called. The name is escaping me. But it was on Joe's Domage, and I think it was called Another Whole Melodic Section. And so in the song Twinkle Tits on here, Twinkle Tits has this theme that's new to Twinkle Tits, a whole bunch of solos, and then it concludes with this piece known as interlude or Another Whole Melodic Section, which apparently was Twinkle Tits. He took this theme he'd been playing with the Mothers and made it a part of this song. So that was a really interesting, like, sort of hole to be filled. Going on through it, we have 16 minutes of the clap, which I think it's unnecessary. I don't think we needed this. It's essentially 16 minutes of percussion. I don't think it's that interesting or compelling. It was the first time I was like, okay, cool. I don't think it's something I will re-listen to, especially since it's like the first 2 tracks on the 3rd disc. I'm just going to skip to the 3rd track. But what is neat is realizing that a lot of what is on like Lather, and Shake Your Booty to some degree, right? No, just maybe Leather. But on Leather, all those like interludes where Bozio's talking and you get these weird like percussion bits and stuff like that, a lot of those percussion bits are coming from the clap, are coming from this like 15 minutes of completely indulgent music. I think like there's like part of like Pedro's Dowry, Trying to Grow a Chin, Whatever Happened to All the Fun in the World, in Leather Goods, and all of these songs, little bits of the clap, you get little tiny pieces of this. knowing that information is cool because I didn't know that before, or if I did, I had long ago forgotten it. So this was a really cool thing. But then being like, I don't need to listen to it though. Like, I mean, just because now I know where it originates from, a song that ended up for like a minute and a half on an album that the clap represents one of the worst edits in the history of Frank Zappa editing, where it originally plays its role. So I don't now need 15 minutes of it, but it's neat to know how it would be used in the future by Frank. So there's that. But without a doubt, by far the most interesting thing on here is the 18-minute and 12-second version of Transylvania Boogie. Transylvania Boogie, when it was released on Chunga's Revenge, starts off with this solo. Starts off with a guitar solo. Then it has these like different little sort of changes that maybe sound like they could be spontaneous. Or if they're planned, they're like kind of the way the Dead would shift into like different gears in the end of Eyes of the World in like 73, 74. So those kind of shifts. Maybe it sounds on spontaneous, but on tapes and on boots, and then even when after Frank passed and they started to release the road tapes, there was a track called Transylvania Boogie that definitely contains sort of the same energy and the same vamp as this 5-minute song on Chunga's Revenge, but started off with this whole different melodic section. And it almost always, if not always, was Help I'm a Rock into Transylvania Boogie. So it was almost like, was it a connecting piece of new music that just didn't have a name? Was it the end of Help I'm a Rock, as Frank, had envisioned it? Was it part of Transylvania Boogie? And for some reason, Frank just decided to leave it off and give just this thing on Chunga's Revenge that name. Well, what we find out is Transylvania Boogie is that beautiful piece of music in the beginning. Then it's solos. Then it's it's a Frank solo, and then I think other solos. But then we get a really, really, really long Frank solo. And then the 5 minutes we get on Chunga's Revenge is like the last 5 minutes, for the most part, of this 18-minute jam. So Frank didn't even use the main theme, which is fantastic. One of the best things on here. He just gave us the last 5 minutes, which is strange. So there's some really, as a hardcore fan, I'm going on way too long about what it means to me as a hardcore fan. There are some really, really neat fill in the holes things. But then, how does it actually stand up as music? All right, so as actual pieces of music, side one starts off with Funky Nothingness, which was recorded back in 67, I think, with Estrada and Motorhead. And it's just this acoustic little, I don't know, it hasn't grabbed me yet. Nothing about it. I think it's interesting. It's kind of neat to hear. To me, it doesn't sound like a album defining piece of music. So it's interesting as a leadoff track. I do think, again, if Chunga's Revenge had opened with this long, 9.5 minute, awesome kind of terse but powerhouse jam session, and then followed with this, I think that's more interesting. I'm a little puzzled that this 2-minute piece is like the song defining thing. But again, Frank didn't put this out. So maybe that wasn't what he fully intended. Then we get Tommy Vincent Duo 1. There are 4 of these on here. 3 of them are called that. One is Duo 2. One is the unedited master. One is called Moldred. And it is Ainsley Dunbar on drums, and Frank for a brief while on bass, and then a whole bunch of guitar. And they're just jamming and playing, and it goes for like 18 minutes, right? Goes for 21 minutes, 22 minutes. Some really interesting moments in those 22 minutes, without a doubt. But what we get here is we get just the 44 seconds, the first 44 seconds of the jam with him on bass, Frank on bass. That comes out of Funky Nothingness. Then we go into the cover Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild, which I like. Then we go into I'm a Rolling Stone, which I think works if Chunga's Revenge is first. I think if Chunga's Revenge has not been played, Chunga's Revenge is the 5th song. These should have been flipped. I think it's too early for I'm a Rolling Stone at this point. It feels too something. I don't know. It drags a little bit in the placement, though I think it's a really good performance. We get the Chunga's Revenge basement version, which is awesome. And all of these contain either a sugar hand. They usually contain a Harris solo, an Underwood solo, and always a Frank solo. Sometimes a bass solo, sometimes a drum solo. And sometimes Harris is on keys, Ian's on keys or sax, so they're mixing it up as to what we're getting on each jam session. We get the Chungus Revenge. We get something called Basement Jam, which is the one piece of music that I don't think works. This is a piece of music that you can hear on Shake Your Booty. And when Terry's talking at one point, wait a minute, when Terry's talking, Frank is working on this edit in the background, so you can hear that. Working on it as late as when he was working with Terry, and yet still had decided not to release it. And I think that was a good call. This jam just seems a little too seems like it should have been on the bonus material and not part of the album proper. It's one of the jams that doesn't work for me. There's a cover of two songs combined into one medley called Work With Me, Annie. Annie Had a Baby. We get a short version on the album. We get a longer version in the bonus tracks. I think the longer version works better because the best part of it is the solos. Neither one of the songs really do anything for me. They're covers. Neither one of them, I think, are really compelling covers, to be honest. I don't know why. But the solo section, just these short little solos, Harris or Zappa, or on the longer version of Harris, and then an Underwood, like organ or keyboard solo, and then Zappa. I like the little solo section. That works. But this song kind of, the Basement Jam, Work With Me, Annie, Annie Had a Baby combo in the middle of the album doesn't really work for me. We get more of the Tommy Vincent duo, 6 minutes of the Tommy Vincent duo, which is pretty entertaining. But again, I don't know. It doesn't seem like something like, there's always the argument of what would Frank have released in his lifetime. Like live shows, I think if you go out and play a live show, it should always be released regardless of the results. I mean, you've sold tickets. People have a right to own that forever. I'm okay with that. This though, I'm like, it's good, but like I recognize that how many people out there are really going to tolerate this unless you're a hardcore Zappa fan. Because Zappa's guitar playing, like if this was Vinny and Frank in 79 or 80, yeah, I'd listen to 45 minutes of it probably. But I don't know if Frank's guitar playing is interesting enough to last this long without anything else, without a bass player to like play against. Ainsley's great, but I do think there are times when Frank's is just not pushing boundaries in the way that I'm like really locked into that. And I feel that way about this. I think this version is good. The longer version is even more of, gets a little bit like I start to daydream towards the middle of it. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it is great, but it loses me a little bit. And I'm a jam band fan. I love Mo, I love Fish, I love the Dead. I love long, indulgent, stupid things like this. Frank's not able to keep my attention the entire time, at least at this point. The Charlena comes next, fantastic. Khaki Sack, a really good live piece that the Mothers used to play. This isn't live, but a really good version of a piece that the Mothers used to play. Absolutely fantastic. And then it closes out with Twinkle Tits. This Twinkle Tits has sort of I think an acoustic bass beginning and feels a little more jazzy and feels a little more not cohesive. It doesn't seem to fit with the rest of it. There's a version take 2, which the band nails from start to finish, which I think is a better version. It's only a minute and a half longer. But Twinkle Tits is great. It's a great song, but I don't think the beginning works very well. Or at least I haven't. I like the other version better at this point. So the album itself, I think would be a really, really interesting release. It's a really interesting release, but some of my favorite stuff is on the bonus discs. Disc 2 starts off with an alternate take of Chungus Revenge. I'll take many alternate takes of Chungus Revenge. Great song, full powerhouse version, fantastic. Another version of Love Will Make Your Mind Go Wild. Yeah, I can give or take that. Then we get Transylvania Boogie, which I think is the highlight for sure of this entire thing. Both the way it fills in those holes, Frank's performance, the guitar sound, the energy. We all know what the last 5 minutes sounds like. It's fantastic. The energy of this entire song is fantastic. I think it is the best thing on here. Another version of Charlena, the unedited master, so a longer version of Charlena. A little indulgent, but the alternate version of Work With Me, Annie, Annie Had a Baby, which I like better than the long one, just because that little Underwood solo right there in the middle. We get Twinkle Tits, False Start. It's only 47 seconds long. I don't think we need this. I don't know. Or I think you could have just combined it into one track, so we just have Twinkle Tits. No, but then that's a waste, and I have to listen to a false start every time. So no, so I'm not sure we need a 47 seconds of a false start, personally. But this isn't like Project Object where we're getting everything we possibly can, or maybe this is everything we have, right? And that's why it's all here. But then we end disc 2 with its Twinkle Tits take 2, the full version, interlude at the end, whole bunch of solos. Really, really like this. Probably my second, up there with the Chunga's Revenges. My second highlight of this is this take 2 of Twinkle Tits. Disc 3 starts off with 2 versions of the clap, 15 minutes of the clap. Yeah, 2 unedited masters of the clap. I don't know if I need this. I don't know if I will ever listen to it again. Then we get our 22 minutes of Frank and Vinny going at it. Frank and Vinny. It's called Tommy Vincent Duo, but it's Frank and Ainsley. Again, he loses me at times, but then there are also some really, really, really interesting moments throughout it. So I'm torn on this. Chunga's Revenge, take 8, a 20-minute version of that. Yes, give me every version of Chunga's Revenge. I'm okay with that. And then we get 3 other songs, instrumentals, that also just kind of don't do it for me. Halos and Arrows, which is another sort of acoustic-y kind of light piece. Just one of those almost like you could see if he had spent more time with it, and I don't know if he finished producing it. It would fill a role on on an album that would be like Little Umbrellas or It Must Be a Camel or things like that, right? Fill in those kind of like gaps, those kind of between longer jams. We get a song called Moldred, which I meant to talk about earlier, but I forgot, which is part of the Tommy Vincent Duo jams, slowed down with bass overlaid on it. Actually kind of works, and it's actually pretty interesting, and I think put in the right spot on an album, it probably works even better than the Tommy Vincent Duo stuff. At first I was like, oh, this is a waste, but the more I've listened to this, I'm like, yeah, this actually works. And then it closes with Fast Funky Nothingness, which, echoing back to the beginning, it's just something that doesn't do anything for me or hasn't done anything for me yet. So I'm really torn on this release. There is a whole bunch of discussion in my comments, on other people's comments, online, in forums, about whether the ZFT and Joe Travers and all these releases are honoring or dishonoring Zappa, whether, Zappa didn't release it, so it shouldn't have been released. I think with live shows, I have no problem with live shows being released. I mean, if the Zappa Family Trust wants to release them, I think live shows. For the most part, the Project Objects stuff, I'm 100% behind. The documenting of an album, the intent of that album is to be like, hey, we're giving you this stuff that probably only the hardcore fans want, but we're giving it to you so you can see how these pieces fall into place. I'm okay with that because of the attitude presented going into it. But this is a weird one because it's not like Frank didn't have time to release this. I mean, he was working on it in 1970. We know he was revisiting it again at some point when Terry was in his band, because he's working on Basement Jam, and we can hear Terry saying he's been working on spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in there, or whatever he says. So we know he revisited this throughout the 70s. He used a lot of the clap when he put Leather together. So we know that it's not like something he forgot about. He just decided not to put it out. And so, and there are a couple things on here which were supposed to be on like a 3-disc version of the Lost episodes, but still then the intent is really kind of like, yeah, the album just didn't happen because it wasn't meant to happen, but maybe here are the highlights from what was going to be an album. So I don't know. Like Uncle Meat, when they re-released Uncle Meat on Meat Light, there was an alternate track listing of Uncle Meat that Frank had mocked up. I think the original track, it was supposed to be in this sequence, and he didn't, but it's presented as that, and why you still get the full album. And so I don't know why that sits different with me than this, because I do think some of this, like 15 minutes of the clap, like maybe Frank never wanted that to come out, and he really recorded it for the express purpose of hobbling those pieces together, right? Like the 21-minute jam session that happened. Yes, he recorded it, but then he also did these other things with it. So I don't know. I'm really torn on this, and maybe that's because I'm not sure how I feel about it. Some of the stuff I do kind of like out, like drift away on, and I haven't done that for a long time on like Frank Zappa jams. So I don't know. I'm conflicted. But anyways, enough of my yakking. I'm gonna rank this among all the other like 61 or 62 that have been released after Frank Zappa passed away, and this right there is where I right now put it after listening to it at 2 weeks. And number 23. I was going to like an album. I went down the list and like, what album do I want to listen to first at this point in time, 2 weeks into it? And the last one that I got to where I was like, funky nothingness or this was Civilization Phase 3. And at this point, I will probably more likely grab this than I will Civilization Phase 3. But Transfusion, like even now, like 2 weeks into it, if I had a choice, and I was like driving to Austin and I knew I was going to listen to like one album or one CD, and I was just hyped up to like really hone in on something, I think I'd pick Transfusion first tonight, and then going up the list with that. So I'm putting it at 23. That may change, obviously. All of these have the right to change. But yeah, I don't know. That's where I comfortably put it. I'm for some weird reason, I'm highly conflicted on this one. It's confusing me. There are moments I absolutely love, though. So, yeah, those are my thoughts, man. Rambling, gambling, trambling thoughts. Highlight Transylvania Boogie without a doubt. All the Jungle's Revenges are great. The Twinkle Twits are Twinkle Twits, which is actually more appropriate than Twinkle Tits, are great. But there's some stuff on here. A couple of the R&B covers are good, but there is some stuff on here that just like, I'm like, huh. I like it. It's good, but it's not like blowing my mind, and I don't think it's a good entry point for first. I don't know how I feel about. Yeah, it's not a good entry point for first time Zappa lovers in any way. No, that's weird. It would send you in. You'd have a whole bunch of weird different ideas about Frank if this was the first thing and only thing you listened to for like 6 months. But anyways, all right, that's all I got. I'm rambling. Subscribe, comment below, thoughts, please share them. I know you guys, people have been commenting for weeks now about how they've been enjoying this. I really want to know, like at this point in time, 2 weeks in, where that enjoyment level is, how often you're still listening to it, and whether you're actually listening to the whole thing or you're picking out certain moments. I'm as a whole, I want your thoughts as a whole thing. And I might even do a video about like just the philosophy behind what gets released and what doesn't get released, because this is actually the first time where I'm like, wow, maybe not. And I've never ever had that thought before. I was for like, empty out the gutters if you have to. But now I'm like, I'm torn. Anyways, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. Peace. Go listen to music. Go listen to this Transylvania Boogie, people, because it is fantastic. Peace. Talk to you later.